billionaire's son poured hot coffee on a waitress. He didn't see the Mafia boss behind him. The cafe was quiet, the soft hum of conversations mingling with the clink of coffee cups and silverware. The air was filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the faint scent of pastries warmed by the oven. It was a familiar place for Julian DeLuca, a young man born into a world of wealth and privilege. The son of a powerful billionaire, he was accustomed to getting whatever he desired, and he wasn't used to people saying no. Julian sat at his usual corner table, his sharp features illuminated by the soft light streaming through the windows. His eyes, cold and distant, scanned the room with a sense of superiority. He liked being seen, liked knowing that people were aware of his presence. He had always been the center of attention, and it made him feel powerful. Today, however, there was something different in the air. He didn't know it yet, but this day would change everything. Isabella Reyes had been working at the cafe for months now. She was a young woman with a quiet strength about her, a no-nonsense attitude that kept the customers in check. She had learned to navigate the delicate balance of being polite without being servile, of remaining professional despite the occasional rudeness of the clientele. The job wasn't easy, but it paid the bills and gave her a sense of independence. As she carried a tray of steaming drinks toward a table near the back, she noticed Julian sitting at his usual spot, his eyes fixed on his phone, completely absorbed in whatever business deal he was brokering. His arrogance was evident even in the way he sat, as if the world was at his feet and everyone around him existed only to serve him. She approached his table, carefully balancing the tray in her hands. But as she reached for the edge of the table to set the drinks down, the tray wobbled, and the hot cup of coffee splashed across Julian's expensive suit. The room seemed to fall silent. Isabella froze, her heart pounding in her chest as Julian stood up, his face contorting in disbelief. His suit, tailored to perfection, was ruined by the dark stain spreading across his chest. The coffee had burned him slightly, but not enough to cause serious harm. Still, he was furious. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Julian's voice was cold, dripping with contempt. His gaze locked onto Isabella's, and she could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. Isabella's pulse raced, but she didn't show any sign of fear. She had dealt with rude customers before, and this was no different. She met his gaze calmly, her posture straight. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice steady. "I didn't mean to," but Julian cut her off, his voice rising with indignation. "You didn't mean to?" "You're lucky it's just coffee. Do you know how much this suit costs?" His eyes flashed with anger, and he reached for the napkin on the table, trying to dab at the stain. "I said I'm sorry," Isabella repeated, her tone unwavering. "It was an accident." She turned to leave, but Julian's voice stopped her. "No," he snapped. "You're going to fix this." "You're going to pay for this mistake." Isabella's hand clenched around the tray. "It was an accident." "I don't need to fix anything," she said, her voice calm but firm. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her. A tense silence stretched between them, the weight of Julian's anger filling the air. The other customers in the cafe were now watching, some with curiosity, others with quiet discomfort. But Isabella held her ground, refusing to be anyone's punching bag, not even the son of a billionaire. Julian, stunned by her response, stood there for a moment, his mind racing. He wasn't used to being talked to this way, especially not by someone who was clearly beneath him in the social hierarchy. His fingers tightened around the napkin, and for a moment he considered escalating the situation further. But then a voice from behind him interrupted. "Is there a problem here?" Julian turned around sharply, surprised by the deep, commanding voice. Jason, at the entrance of the cafe, was a man who immediately commanded attention. Vincenzo Romano was a figure of power. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that was both intimidating and magnetic, his dark eyes, sharp as knives, scanned the scene with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. Vincenzo wasn't just anyone. He was a mafia boss with ties to every corner of the city. His family's empire extended far beyond the law, and his name carried weight in a way Julian had never experienced. To Julian, Vincenzo was the kind of man who existed in the shadows, the kind of man whose influence reached places even the richest could not touch. Isabella, however, didn't flinch. She had seen men like Vincenzo before, the kind whose power made them untouchable, and she knew not to let fear control her. She met Vincenzo's gaze for a split second, then turned back to Julian, whose face had lost its color. "I'm fine," Julian muttered, still trying to recover from the shock of being publicly embarrassed. "This isn't your business." Vincenzo's lips curled into a slight smile. "Maybe not, but it seems like you've made it mine, young man." He took a step forward, his presence overwhelming the space between them. The weight of his words was undeniable. Julian straightened, his chest puffing with pride, but the reality of the situation was starting to settle in. Vincenzo wasn't someone you talked back to, especially not in a public place like this. "I'm sorry, sir," Julian said, his voice now forced and tight, though the anger still simmered beneath his words. "It was a mistake." Vincenzo's smile widened, but there was no humor in it. "Mistakes happen, don't they?" He turned to Isabella, who stood quietly at the side. "And some mistakes are harder to forgive than others. But I think you handled it well." Isabella, unsure of where this conversation was headed, nodded slightly. "Thank you." Julian shot her a sharp look, still burning with resentment. "You're lucky he's here. Otherwise, I'd have made you clean this up." Vincenzo chuckled darkly, his voice low. "It's not her mistake to clean up." "You spilled the coffee, not her." The tension in the room thickened, and Julian suddenly felt like a small, insignificant figure in this strange new world, where power didn't come from money alone. Vincenzo's calm demeanor made him feel exposed, vulnerable in a way he had never felt before.
"Take care of your suit," Vincenzo added, his voice suddenly colder.
"And remember next time, not all mistakes can be fixed with money." Julian stood there, his pride wounded more than his body ever could be. As Vincenzo turned and walked away, Julian's anger boiled over, but he remained silent. He knew that for all his wealth and influence, there were some people, like Vincenzo, who existed in a realm far beyond his reach. Isabella watched the exchange quietly, then turned back to the counter to fetch a new coffee for another customer. She wasn't fazed by the drama, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in that brief moment. As she moved around the cafe, her thoughts lingered on the strange encounter. Julian's arrogance had been palpable, but Vincenzo's power was something entirely different, something deeper, more dangerous, and for reasons she couldn't explain it intrigued her. But she wasn't about to let her curiosity lead her into dangerous waters. No matter who Julian was, or who Vincenzo might be, she had learned long ago that the world of the wealthy and powerful was not a place she belonged. The following days seemed to stretch on forever for Isabella. The cafe was quieter than usual, and each time the door opened, she found herself looking up, half expecting to see Julian or the mysterious man Vincenzo Romano walking in. She had tried to put it all behind her, the embarrassing encounter with Julian, the unsettling presence of Vincenzo, but she couldn't escape the weight of their interactions. Both men had left an impression on her, one for his arrogance and the other for his power. Despite her desire to stay out of their worlds, something about their lives, their actions, intrigued her. She tried to ignore the curiosity gnawing at her, but it was difficult when she worked in a city so full of secrets. On the fourth day after the incident, Isabella was preparing to serve the usual morning crowd when the cafe door swung open again. She glanced up, expecting another regular customer, but instead, it was Julian. His dark eyes swept the room, searching until they landed on her. For a moment, he hesitated, as if unsure of his place in this unfamiliar territory. Isabella's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly regained her composure. Her expression remained neutral as she approached his table, her footsteps measured. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing any sign of weakness. "You?" Julian said, his voice almost too soft. "Can we talk?" Isabella's gaze didn't falter, but she felt an odd tension building between them. "I don't think we have anything to discuss." His jaw tightened, and for a second he seemed to consider walking away. But something kept him in place. He had come for a reason, and he wasn't going to back down easily. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice quieter now, as if the weight of the words had finally sunk in, "for what happened before. It wasn't right." Isabella blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. She had expected arrogance, excuses, maybe even another outburst, but not this. She crossed her arms, keeping her distance. I don't need your apology, Julian. You've already made your point. And I've already made mine. He looked down at the table, his fingers tapping nervously against the surface. I didn't mean to treat you like that. I wasn't raised to... He broke off, clenching his fist before running a hand through his hair. I was wrong. Isabella remained silent, watching him. She had heard apologies from people like him before, words meant to ease the conscience more than to offer true regret. But this was different. She couldn't explain why, but there was something in his voice and his posture that made her pause. I'm still not interested in your world, Julian, she said, her tone firm. The way you live, the way you think, none of that changes just because you said sorry. His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something in them that wasn't just pride or arrogance. There was something deeper, something that made him seem vulnerable. I don't expect you to forgive me just like that, he said, his voice low. But I want to make things right. I don't know why, but I want to prove to you that I can be better than the person I was that day. For a brief moment, Isabella was silent, trying to understand the man sitting in front of her. She had seen rich people before, all of them wrapped up in their own lives and convinced of their superiority. But Julian, there was something different about him. Was it real? Was he truly capable of change? Or was this just another attempt to control her, to manipulate her into seeing him as something more than he was? Before she could respond, the cafe door opened again, and this time, the air shifted. The low murmur of conversation quieted, and the atmosphere grew tense. Vincenzo Romano walked in. He was a tall figure, his presence commanding the attention of anyone within 100 feet of him. His eyes scanned the room, settling briefly on Julian, before he made his way toward the counter. There was something about Vincenzo that made the whole room feel as though it were holding its breath. Isabella swallowed hard, instinctively standing straighter as he approached. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon, but now that he was here, she couldn't help but feel both nervous and strangely safe. There was power in the way he carried himself, an air of authority that made even the boldest question their place in the world. Vincenzo reached the counter and turned to face Julian, who had been watching him intently since he walked in. De Luca, Vincenzo greeted him with a casual nod, though there was nothing casual about the way he spoke. Julian's posture stiffened. Romano, he replied, his voice betraying a hint of unease. Isabella, sensing the tension, glanced between the two men, unsure of what was about to unfold. She had no idea how deep the connection between these two really went, but the air between them crackled with something dark, something unspoken. Vincenzo's gaze flickered to Isabella, and for a moment he simply studied her, his eyes scanning her face as if looking for something she couldn't understand. Then, with a slight smile, he turned back to Julian. I see you're still lingering in places where you don't belong, Vincenzo said, his voice smooth, almost like a purring threat. Julian's eyes narrowed. What do you want, Romano? Vincenzo shrugged, the movement almost lazy, as if he didn't have a care in the world. Nothing, he replied, the words slipping from his lips with ease. But it seems I have to remind you, De Luca, that power doesn't come from money or status alone. Isabella found herself caught between two worlds, the world she had always known, the one where she could blend into the background, keep her head down, and live a life untouched by the games of the powerful. And the world of Julian and Vincenzo, where nothing was ever simple and everything seemed to come with a price. Julian had tried in his own way to pull her into his world. He had shown her kindness, though sometimes it felt more like a way to prove something than a genuine desire to understand her. There was always something in his eyes, a hunger, as if he were seeking something, validation, approval, or maybe redemption. But the more she saw him, the more she realized that his world wasn't one she could belong to. His wealth, his name, and his power, none of it could protect him from the shadows that lurked just beyond the edge of his vision. Then there was Vincenzo. Every time he entered a room, it felt as if the air shifted, as though the room was no longer big enough to contain his presence. He moved with purpose, with a certainty that unsettled her. He wasn't just powerful. He was a man who understood the world's darkest corners and embraced them. She had seen the way he looked at her, as if she were a puzzle he wanted to solve, and in that look, she had felt something deeper, something she didn't know if she was ready to understand. It was late one evening when she saw him again. Isabella was closing the cafe, the last of the customers having left an hour ago. She was wiping down the counter when she heard the sound of the door opening. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. The way the door creaked, the heavy steps that followed, she knew it was him before he even spoke. "Still working hard, I see." Vincenzo's voice was like a shadow, deep and calm, and it seemed to echo in the stillness of the cafe. Isabella turned to face him, her stomach tightening at the sight of him standing in the doorway, looking every bit the man who controlled everything in his path. "I thought you left for the night," she said, keeping her voice neutral as she folded the cloth in her hands.
"I had some business," Vincenzo replied, stepping further into the room. He didn't approach the counter, just stood there, his dark eyes fixed on her.
"But now I'm just here to talk." Isabella didn't say anything at first. She had learned by now that words with Vincenzo didn't mean much. He could twist anything into something else, something he could use to his advantage. She glanced at the clock. It was getting late, and she was tired. "I don't think we have anything to talk about." Vincenzo raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "You don't think so?" He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I think we have quite a lot to discuss." Isabella took a deep breath. "I don't want to be part of your games, Vincenzo. I told you that." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Games?" he repeated, as if the word were unfamiliar to him.
"This isn't a game, Isabella. This is reality."
"And in this reality, people like you don't get to walk away so easily." She shook her head, frustration bubbling inside her.
"I'm not a pawn in anyone's game."
"Not in Julian's, not in yours. I'm not some prize to be won." His expression softened slightly, though his eyes still held that same intense focus. "No, you're not a prize," he said, his voice almost tender, though it carried an undercurrent of something darker.
"But you're a part of this world now, whether you like it or not."
Isabella took a step back, her pulse quickening.
"I don't want to be part of your world,"
she said firmly. "I didn't ask for any of this." Vincenzo's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No one ever asks for this world, Isabella. But it's here, and it's waiting for you. All you have to do is accept it." She couldn't hold his gaze anymore. Something about the way he spoke, as if he had already decided her fate, made her feel small, insignificant. She had spent her life trying to keep her distance from men like him, from people who played with power like it was a game, and yet here she was, standing face to face with one of the most dangerous men in the city. "Why are you here, Vincenzo?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "What do you want from me?" Vincenzo's expression shifted, and for a moment she saw something else in his eyes, a flicker of something softer, almost wistful. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. "I want you to understand, Isabella," he said, his voice low. "I want you to see that I'm not like them." He gestured vaguely in the direction of the city, as if the very air around them was filled with the people who had wronged her. "I'm not here to deceive you or play tricks. I don't want your love or your loyalty. What I want is something simpler." She took a step back, confusion clouding her mind. "What's simpler than that?" Vincenzo's eyes darkened, and for the first time, Isabella felt a chill run through her.
"I want your trust," he said quietly. "I want you to stop running from this world and accept that it's the only one that matters." Isabella felt a pang of something deep inside her. Fear, perhaps, or something else she wasn't ready to admit.
She opened her mouth to say something, but before she could speak, the door opened again. Julian walked in, his face tense, his posture rigid. His gaze locked onto Vincenzo immediately, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The moment he entered, Everything about the space shifted. Julian's presence felt different now. No longer the young man who had once thought his wealth could buy him anything, but someone who had come to understand the dangers lurking just beneath the surface of his life.
Isabella,
Julian said, his voice sharp as he stepped forward. I need to talk to you. Vincenzo turned to face him, his eyes flickering with something unreadable. You're too late, DeLuca, he said, his tone light, almost mocking. This conversation is over. Julian didn't flinch. He stood tall, his jaw set in determination. This is between me and Isabella, he said, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Vincenzo. Stay out of it. For a moment the two men faced each other in silence, the tension between them palpable. Isabella could feel it, the weight of their rivalry, the way they seemed to be sizing each other up like they were preparing for some kind of battle. Vincenzo's eyes flickered to Isabella, and he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I think I've said enough for now, he said, his voice smooth as velvet. But remember, Isabella, you're not free of this world. None of us are. With that, Vincenzo turned and left the cafe, his footsteps fading into the night. Isabella stood frozen for a moment, her heart racing. She turned to face Julian, who was watching her with a look she couldn't quite read. You're not safe in this world, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I know you don't want to hear it, but I'm the only one who can protect you. Isabella looked at him, her chest tightening. I don't need protecting, she said, her voice shaking. I need to be free. Julian's eyes softened, and he stepped closer to her, his hand reaching out as if to touch her arm. I don't know how to give you that freedom, he said, his voice filled with regret. But I'll do whatever it takes to try. Isabella felt the weight of his words, the sincerity in them, but she also felt something else, the heavy burden of the choices before her. She had always thought she could choose her own path, that she could escape the shadows of the world around her. But now, standing between Julian and Vincenzo, she realized something she hadn't before. The world wasn't just a series of choices. Sometimes it was a force that swept you away. No matter how hard you tried to resist, she pulled away, shaking her head. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. I can't be a part of your world, Julian.